All right, now we are gonna come back and we're gonna stain our chest, and then we're gonna glaze it. Actually, for this piece, the completed one is going to have a coat of stain on top of this light color paint, and then glaze as well if I need it. And really, when you're layering, let me just say, don't be afraid. Like, you know, like I talked about in the beginning of the book, this piece for me, you know, it sat primed in the garage for a couple of weeks before I really kind of thought, yes, like let's make it this kind of aged tan, you know, really kind of Tuscan feel almost, and at the same time very traditional, and celebrate just the simple clean lines and the great original hardware that came on this piece. So don't be afraid to like add a layer if you're feeling that in your gut, and then you know what, you can cover it up. Now that's trickier if you're trying to, you know, restore a piece or restain a piece, but just always know like it's always fixable. That's not a word, but we're in the South, it's okay. So anyway, what we're gonna do is we're gonna stain our paint first. Now, I'm just gonna tell you what I do. Again, there are so many different ways and many people believe many different things. So this is my way. I use cheap foam brushes for staining. I find that it's absolutely wasteful and just a pain to have to wash my brushes with mineral spirits and all that other jazz. So I just do use one of these and honestly throw it away after a couple of uses. So, and what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to create an effect. I'm not really using this for a perfect wood grain stain, so I could even use this after it even dried with the stain in it. Now I've got a dark walnut stain right here. Okay, we're gonna use a dark walnut stain to go on top of this really pretty pebble color. Now what you're gonna do with a stain, you're gonna have a damp cloth. Honestly, I would err to the side of wet rather than even semi-dry, because this will stain your paint. Realize that when you commit to stain your paint, it is gonna change the color. Even if it just warms it or cools it down or, you know, deepens, you know, kind of intensifies the color, it is gonna change it. Whereas a glaze is really workable, and probably you can wipe it all off in 10, you know, you've got 10 or 15 workable minutes with a glaze. So when you choose to use a stain, be ready to move. Always wipe it off quickly at first, and if it's not giving you the depth of color that you need, then you're more than, you know, able to just keep adding and adding and adding. So we're gonna use a dark walnut stain at first, and because I know that I want this piece to really darken a little bit, I'm gonna really wipe it on, and I'm gonna leave it for just a minute because I do want this piece to kind of have a pretty age to it. Really make sure you get in those little details that you have already distressed, because this will just again stain those and really kind of create a pretty depth of color. Now because I want this dark, I'm just gonna kind of test and see how, yeah, so see, I don't want to wipe too much, and I may actually use a drier side with this because I do want it to really stain. And just as you wipe off, I just encourage you to use really smooth motions, because if you, and honestly, you know, you really need to just go on and kind of do one long motion at one time, because that way at the end it really appears kind of seamless as you rub it all in together. Okay, and you're just gonna wanna keep wiping into your grain, and really, you know, with things like this, when you know you want it darker, it's really not that bad. When you're just barely wanting to age the paint, for instance, I do a lot of white with an ebony stain, and that's kind of tricky because you really want to wipe it off super fast and very smooth to barely gray your white paint. But this, you know, you don't have to be so particular. So see, this is so easy. Y'all can do this. They're just brilliant. So we're just wiping it on, and you really don't even have to have a solid coat, because again, you know, when you're wiping it in, it's gonna all wind up there anyway. So, you know, don't worry about that. It's gonna get covered. I sometimes do like to leave a little bit of a, again, kind of pick a little showstopper point, like where it'll be a little bit darker. I typically never do this with and leave like a hard edge. I think that that's kind of criminal. Like, to me, that does not look natural. So I'm gonna keep kind of smoothing until it smooths out some. This, however, looks really kind of worn and kind of faded. It's really dark there, like it almost got a smudge on it. I think that looks pretty natural. So I would leave that. Okay, let's kind of move on to these grooves and some of these details, because you see now, to do it smooth, it's really not a big deal. Again, now with your you know, anytime you're trying to work in a groove, always begin in the grooves first. This goes for paint, stain, glaze, whatever. Start inside these grooves, get it really good in the grooves first, because you know, you want it to cover there, and then you smooth right here, which again, really for our purposes right now, we're just trying to get it in the groove so that it will remain there. Because we're gonna wipe just the outside, the top off. And be sure, you know, cover that wood that's already exposed. So now just lightly start wiping it. Now again, be careful and just don't be afraid. That's why you got to get some of these nasty gloves, because in the end of the day, if I saw it drying too quickly, you know, I could just, you know, use my finger to wipe the inside of these gloves out, these grooves out a little bit. Let's get this good. And you know, something like this, again, it's kind of, you just have to kind of play and see what's working. Typically, I don't really have to use a glove to do that, but you know, with this, I might have to. And then you're gonna smooth it. You know, when you're working in your grooves first, you're gonna have to work there and then kind of smooth on the top as you go. But already, can you just see kind of the depth that that's bringing? I will tell you this is something I love about a stain. I love that a stain gives a really lustrous, really professional finish, whereas a glaze by itself sometimes does not give that, and they're actually more expensive. So sometimes I just prefer to use strictly a stain. I think this time that I may actually do both on this piece, but I don't know, I'm really liking the way this is looking. So see, it's just gonna all be done just as I'm going and as I see, you know, what it's really looking like. It's just that's why I refer to it as a masterpiece. It's a very artful thing. You just kind of have to go with your gut and what makes you happy in the moment. So let's see, just gonna keep working. It's difficult for me to not talk while I work when I know you're there listening. And again, now if I were really worried about this piece and the color it was gonna turn, I'd be wiping this off immediately, because I know that with this being an oil-based stain, it is staining the paint as I work. But I'm not worried about that, so not a big deal at all. I want it to be darker, so I'm okay with that. So again, let's just wipe a little bit. Man, I'm loving that. I really, really am. I'm excited. Okay. And you know, anytime that you're, you know, trying to leave something in a groove, this is where I'm always going to tell you, you wipe perpendicular. You know, if you want it to be, you know, left right here, then I don't need to be wiping this way. I'm going to wipe it out. You know, I need to be wiping this way, just barely, like with the very edge of your cloth, just barely. And that really applies to glaze. That really picks up and lifts and moves and gets out of your grooves even quicker. You know, a stain's going to pretty much set in. Oh, that's really looking good. I'm so excited. Let's just finish this. And I actually, sometimes y'all, I will use a stain to create like a dry brush effect on top of paint. And if I were gonna do that, it would be very much what you just saw me do, only I would leave it, you know, so that as it dried, it was really more like a dry brush. So now this is the stain, and now we're gonna come back in a second and I'm gonna glaze either the other side, or I may even glaze on top of this if I feel like it's dry enough. It may not be quite dry. But we will go in and glaze, and you'll kind of see the difference in the workability of your product and what you're able to get away with. So stay tuned.